Okay, today I don't know how this is going to go because I'm going to navigate a couple of different windows here and you won't be able to see it because of the way that I do these videos. So, uh, it's been a week since the motion passed, the non binding motion passed that was served by the NDP that the Liberals supported, although heavily watered down, to say that the government or the parliament supports a ceasefire, an arms embargo, and a couple of other things that the government was already about to do. And it passed. It made a media splash. There was probably 3 days of focus on Gaza in Canada for the first time, like for a long time. And now we get this article from Marika Walsh at the Globe and Mail that is very, very interesting. And so let's go through this, what's in the article and what happened behind the scenes in some of the negotiations. And I have to say, I also have a couple of insights as to what happened behind the scenes in the negotiations. And I'll add it into this analysis. That's when I said at the beginning, I'm not sure how this is going to go. Let's see. Fingers crossed that this works. So the headline is an NDP motion on Gaza threatened to split the Liberal caucus. How last minute talks helped avert a political embarrassment. A political embarrassment. That's an interesting way to talk about this. Okay, so we find out in this piece that according to the Liberal whip, they expected, this is the lead, upwards of 80, not 30, upwards of 80 of their backbench MPs to vote with the NDP's motion. So remember that this is a resolution. It's brought by the opposition. An opposition party can bring these resolutions. So can members of the government as well. And they express an opinion of the House of Commons, not a policy directive, which is why this motion was non-binding. And so up to 80 backbench MPs, and then as activists mobilized, the Liberals started to get even more worried that that number was going to climb to 90 backbench MPs and potentially have the Liberals vote in favor of the motion as it was. Now, here's the thing about this motion. Everything that I've heard from people within the NDP who are critical of the NDP was that this motion in and of itself, getting on the debate, getting on the agenda was a victory because the party's leadership doesn't want to get into difficult politics, as we can see in 100 different ways. And so the fact that this motion was even debated at all was a huge victory. And that victory is the victory of activists all across Canada doing what they can to push politicians to do what they can. And so, we have this motion. The victory is it's being debated because now every single journalist in Ottawa is focusing finally on Gaza. And so here we find out that the Liberals counted their votes and freaked out that it was going to possibly pass. They were going to whip the 39 members of cabinet to not vote. The way that Marika Walsh writes this, it was a non-starter, according to 3 sources that she talked to. The cabinet would have voted against the motion, though I imagine that the reason why the Liberals were so concerned was that there were probably members in the cabinet who were like toying with maybe even just abstaining, right? And so this is fascinating. It's what do the Liberals do, worried that this motion actually might pass because of all of the activism that people were engaged in? Well, they do what Liberals always do. They take control of the situation. They come up with language that they could live with because it is not, in some cases, not at all different from what their policy was. And in some cases, it was very close to what their policy was. And they go through negotiations with the NDP. Now, we know that, there was a Liberal MP from BC, Talib Noor Mohammed, who approaches NDP MP Heather McPherson to consider making amendments. And this sets off, quote, a cascade of meetings, calls, and text messages over the weekend and near hourly meetings on March 18th between NDP and Liberals. Now, this is an interesting point because it means that the NDP leadership knew going into the vote that would not be the motion they were voting on. Now, not all MPs knew that. The MPs actually, unless they're in the inner circle, didn't find out about these amendments until they were dropped in the debate on them, which is pretty bullshit. And you can imagine people were kind of pissed. And so we got Jen Peterson at the table, Peter Julian, Blake Evans, Jonathan Gauvin on the phone doing these rush negotiations. And the justification for doing this is that they had frequent calls with Muslim and Palestinian advocacy groups. Most of the sources said the influence, in particular the National Council of Canadian Muslims, was a main driver of the NDP's decision to accept the proposed amendments. So the NCCM, who had put forward a very bold statement a couple of weeks ago, maybe just over a month ago now, that Liberal MPs would not be allowed inside of mosques because of the actions taken by the Liberals, is now the group named as being the ones who convinced the NDP to accept the amendments. Politically, this is really bad news for the NDP because this only helps the Liberals. As Walsh has identified, this avoided the embarrassment of a torn caucus. I mean, I'm sorry, but this is such a big issue that if the caucus is torn, they should be torn. They should be publicly torn, and we should know that this person voted in favor and this person voted against. And because of these politics and the strategy decided, I guess, by the NCCM and maybe other groups that are not named, and with the willingness of the NDP to go along, the Liberals are able to now say to the electorate that they care so much about Gaza that they've passed this incredibly important motion. It's, I think that this is a very bad sign of where politics are at right now in this country, that there is much more of an interest to massage the language and compromise to soften a statement motion. Again, if we were talking about a motion that was binding, that actually Canada would have enacted, that would have been different. But this was just a statement, and it actually could have passed without the NDP accepting those amendments from the Liberals. And instead, where are we now a week later? Well, we have Ahmed Hussein saying that, we were always going to restore UNRWA funding, which was in the amended motion, and I think probably in the original motion too, because the Americans were going to amend UNRWA funding. Oh, okay, yeah, right, because literally all we do is what the Americans do. We know that, but that's an interesting little piece of information. There's been lots of reporting that's happened, me included, related to this arms embargo. World Beyond War has done a really useful checklist to say, okay, where are we on the path towards an arms embargo? And they have 5 different points, and we are we've checked off number 1 to say that, a majority of MPs want to see an arms embargo of future arms, because of course the motion was powerfully watered down. That doesn't actually talk about the problem of Canada purchasing weapons from Israel, which we have been doing. We've purchased double the amount of weapons that we've actually sent, and we're purchasing weapons so that we can send them to Latvia. Okay, right, for sure, whatever. So there's tons and tons and tons of work that needs to happen there. And then of course other people have noted that it's not just arms, but there's also military exchanges and police exchanges with training that needs to be targeted. But anyway, and the big thing, of course, is that we have this ceasefire motion. It's not the first ceasefire motion in Canada. There's been other motions calling for a ceasefire. And here we are now 2 days after the UN Security Council has called for a ceasefire in Gaza, and Israel is pounding Rafah and other parts of the Gaza Strip. We haven't heard much from politicians about the ceasefire at the UN, or what they think about this, or how Canada's going to interact, or if Canada's going to, sanction Israel for not following the wishes of the Security Council or anything. And in fact, the Palestine in general is not in the news. Well, I was looking to see what else the Globe and Mail is reporting on, what our politicians or cabinet ministers are saying, or what Palestinians in Canada are saying, or whatever. The only thing underneath this article that I'm mentioning is a wire copy from Reuters, and just two little articles, one about Lebanon, one about the attacks in Rafah. Okay, you go to Global News, there's literally nothing on the homepage right now related to Gaza, related to Israel, related to the UN, related to starvation, related to UNRWA, related to anything. Lebanon, nothing. And in case you're wondering what does pass for international news, they do have news about Diddy, and they do have news about the door from the famous last scene in Titanic, that someone just bought that door and it cost them a lot of money. So Palestine has once again fallen completely out of the news. And all we now are left with is the activism that we have been left with this whole time. So how do we read what happened with this motion? We read it in a couple of ways. One, the activism is gaining ground. It is convincing liberals that they are sunk if they keep doing what they're doing. And if we claim that this motion is the victory, then the liberals get the message that they can keep being slimy, eely snakes going in and out of the messaging for whoever the audience is. You know, I remind you that in the days after this motion passing, Melanie Joly was critical of the motion, saying, you know, that it doesn't exactly stop all of our arms trade. We'll have to see. Mark Miller said that the motion is going to make it difficult for Canada to negotiate with Israel to evacuate people from Gaza. Both Miller and Joly voted in favor of the motion. And so what exactly are we given other than allowing the liberals to have the cover to do hypocrisy in overdrive? Not a whole lot. But the victory of activism to push this into the House of Commons to have the debate was a major one. And for the liberals, they know that this is going to sink their election chances. As we are watching with the discussions and the debates happening in the United States between Biden and support among Democrats who are, endlessly frustrated with how the Democrats have been supporting Israel and all of this, we are going to see a similar echo effect in Canada. In fact, we've already have. And the fact that the liberals were concerned that they could not control the backbench MPs on this issue is wonderfully helpful for us to know. And this is where I am the most angry with the NDP on this, because pushing those divisions to the surface is actually really important, and convincing the NCCM of why it is important to push those divisions to the surface, to show that there is not unanimity among the Liberal caucus on these issues, is critical, because there has to be some sort of fault lines if we're going to exploit any divisions within a bloc. That's how politics works. And when we were given a unanimous decision from a party that we know is not unanimously, I shouldn't say unanimously, because of course there's Marco Mendicino and Anthony Housefather and I don't know, maybe a couple of other people that didn't agree with us, whatever. That's not actually helpful, because it doesn't actually say where the liberals politically are. They are going to suck and they are going to blow at the same time. It's physically not possible. They figured out how to do it, and they had the help of the NDP to be like, yeah, you know what? Actually, we'll accept your motion. That gives you the cover to get reelected, and that destroys our credibility among the activists who we will rely on to save our seats in the next election. That is the political calculus that has happened here. And we wouldn't have even known this if it wasn't for Marieke Walsh's reporting in the Globe and Mail. And so thank you for sure, Marieke, for that. And it also explains why there are some quarters within the NDP and some activists who've been working so hard to make sure that this entire situation was not read as a quote unquote defeat. Sandy and I talked about that in our episode last week, our bonus episode. You should listen to it because it's her and I going back and forth. And of course, when you just get these videos, it's only me, so you miss all the wonderfulness of Sandy. But, this is not tennis. This is not ping pong. This is not a sport. We are talking about what Canada is doing in a moment of unthinkable destruction and death right now. What is Canada doing in this historic moment? And we know what activists have been trying to do. We know what the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Canadians who have taken to the streets since October 7th to demand that Canada not support the genocidal campaign of Israel. We know the work that has been done there. But what is far less clear is what is Canada, the people who have power, going to do to stop this. And you know what? I say it's less clear, but actually, we're led by Zionists. We're led by Zionist forces, by a prime minister who absolutely believes in the lies that Israel is pushing. And maybe there's a point where Israel pushes too far and that Zionist compromise or agreement or whatever collapses, because it's like, if you do the ground invasion in Rafah, like you're literally killing starving people who you are already starving. Maybe that will be the federal government's red line. But these folks are so embedded in these politics that we cannot allow them to drape themselves in motions, in statements, in words, in nothingness that says that they actually care about Palestinian people, that they actually care about Gazans, that they're actually concerned about what's happening there. If they were concerned about what's happening there, they would do something. And we're not seeing them do very much of anything. So I wish all of you who are doing this kind of work the best. We continue, we keep fighting. I know that there's going to be a big mobilization at the end of May around, I assume there's going to be a big mobilization at the end of May around the, maybe I won't say that. You know what? Pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on. I mean, this stuff is public and not public, but it's also one of these things where you should be finding out not about it from me in a video, but from, the activists doing the work. So get involved. Find your local chapter of the Palestinian youth movement, of World Beyond War, of the people of Labor for Palestine, of the people who are doing the work to convince the politicians to change their positions, because that's all we have. That's all we have. And we have to stop pretending that Parliament works the way that we learned in school that it's supposed to work.